Hey, it's Sam. I'm making this quick video about the recent events in the world and the correlation to the astronomy, the astrology and the astronomy. In particular, we've seen a couple major events happen, especially with this Brexit vote in the UK. This happened exactly when Jupiter and Rahu came together in Leo. Now, those of you who've been watching my updates since last summer, when Jupiter entered Leo, I said it's going to be a time when we really revisit what inspires us and what philosophy we seek to embrace in our governments, in our worldview. I'm an American, and here in America, right before Jupiter entered Leo last summer, we had a couple very important Supreme Court decisions and some very liberal rulings that, for instance, gave gays the right to marry. And there was also a ruling that brought down the Confederate flag in the South after a mass shooting. And these were really looked at the time as being, very liberal victories, victories for tolerance and for, a sort of nod toward, coming together. And shortly thereafter, Jupiter went into Leo. So when it happened last summer, Jupiter and Venus were right next to each other, very close. At the same time, Donald Trump burst onto the scene. Right around the same time all of that happened, and then Jupiter went into Leo, and Trump became what he is now, which is the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party. And he really challenged this worldview. And we saw an immediate sort of pushback against the sort of liberal victories and the tolerance that we had seen with Jupiter in Leo. Leo is the sign of the government, the sign of the king, the sign of royalty. And Jupiter, of course, is about our philosophies and our principles and what kind of teachings and leaders we're interested in following. And so, since the middle of July of 2015, Jupiter was in Leo. And so this, showed the rise of, for instance, Trump as a figure, also Bernie Sanders here in U.S. politics. They are kind of mirror images of each other, polar opposites, as you will, or if you will. And of course, like many polar opposites, there's a seed kernel of truth, or a seed common principle that they share, which is that disenfranchised, this sort of feeling that the common man has been left behind. Now, they come at it from very different points of view, but the reason why there's a certain amount of potential crossover, at least conceptually, with Trump and Sanders, at least politically, is because both of them are appealing to people who feel like the system has let them down. The system, or the government, is very much Leo, and Jupiter is very much the prevailing principles and philosophies. And Jupiter in Leo has been a time where we've been questioning those philosophies and wanting to really shake them up, especially since Rahu entered Leo at the beginning of 2016. In early January 2016, Rahu entered Leo as well, right before Jupiter went retrograde. They were exact. One of the first things that happened when Jupiter and Rahu joined in Leo is we started seeing these people dying. Look at how many icons have died. Right away, David Bowie. suddenly, shockingly. And the reason I'm saying icons is because they're very Jupiterian. Jupiter is not just gurus. You need to evolve what that means. Okay, modern gurus, or people that inspire us, or that we tend to worship, are celebrities. Celebrities tend to be very much like modern sort of gurus and philosophers, especially musicians. Someone like Trump and Sanders also are inspiring figures. We see this rise of inspiring figures who are compelling us to change our worldview in both Trump and Sanders, and Hillary Clinton is very much representative of the politics of the establishment, so to speak, of the monarchy. It's ironic when you get into Trump because he's his own kind of monarchy as well, so I'm not going to get into the commentary there. But these inspiring figures are all, and so many of them dying, is also been shown by Jupiter and Rahu in Leo. As soon as Rahu entered Leo and was very close to Jupiter, we saw David Bowie die. Not that long after, we saw Glenn Frey, who was the lead singer of the Eagles, die. We also saw, at least in the U.S., a very sort of iconic, transcendent figure from the Supreme Court named Antonin Scalia, who was in his own right a kind of rock star for the right, suddenly die. And these were sudden, shocking. It's not like people had a disease. Of course, we saw Prince die. Look at all these icons from like the 70s and 80s. And so these are, this is showing the same principle. Now that Jupiter went retrograde and then it went past Rahu again, as soon as Rahu was passed by Jupiter, the exact moment this was happening, we had this Brexit vote in England. And again, this is exactly the same issue. Britons decided, in a seemingly very Rahu fashion, which is sort of confusingly and haphazardly, now there's so much regret about, there's a lot of confusion and regret and wonder about whether they can, vote again or, cast the referendum again, because they didn't really consider so carefully what would happen if they left the EU. Again, all this confusion about throw the bums out no matter what. Well, that's not a solution. Throw the bums out no matter what. You have to think through it a little bit more than that. Now, I'm not weighing in on the British situation because I don't live in the UK. I'm just looking at what I have seen. But I also know enough about this. It's very easy to simplify the problem when a certain facet of it is unsavory, like the immigration part and the fact that bureaucrats in Brussels decide what we do. That can be said, but it's also more complex than that. There are definitely advantages of having that trading bloc, and yes, it's easy to say that those trading blocs only benefit corporations. It's not exactly true. There's all kinds of opportunities that open up for people at a certain strata, but usually, and what is the case in it, and what is happening in this case is the more the more blue collar, the less educated, the more conservative are the ones who voted for the leave in overwhelming majorities, and the younger, more upwardly mobile, more well-educated voted for the stay. And again, ironically, what winds up happening in these situations is the very ones who thought that voting to leave would benefit are the ones that will probably get hurt the most because they have the fewest amount of options. So again, without getting into a commentary, I know it's more complex than that, but also the demographics are quite plain to see as well. And these are, issues that are directly relatable all around the world to immigration problems, what kind of world we want to be, how we want to approach this reality of globalization. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. People need to just face it, folks. Again, you know, I understand, especially with bad trade deals and immigration and the potential dangers and borders being open, that there's all kinds of potential problems with all of that, particularly with globalization and international oligarchies, international financial oligarchies that are running the world. Those things need to be addressed, for sure. Those things are going to be addressed, for sure, at some point. It's just a matter of how much damage we're going to wind up doing. This is my personal opinion. How much damage we're going to wind up doing in the process. We can't go back to closing off borders, for example. We can take some measures, for sure, but the world it's already a global commerce. And by the way, one of the things that happened with our labor and our jobs so interconnected now is you've seen the prosperity of other countries that used to be deadly poor, like India and Vietnam and Korea, not Korea, but you know, some of the, you know, other countries that were just totally downtrodden are now approaching a middle class. So again, the disparity between currencies and all that has shown where certain jobs have left certain economies and they're not coming back because of international globalism. Again, one of the things is, it's easy to say that when you're in a wealthier country that it's hurting you more, but when you're in a poorer country, it's actually helping you more. So again, these are things that in an interdependent world we have to work through. And my point being is that it's very easy to look at, and this is my personal philosophy, so you might just say, shut up, Sam, like some people don't like when I give my opinion, but I'm going to do it anyway. The problems aren't with that situation I just described, with weaker nations getting pulled up by stronger nations, because eventually there's a codependency and a benefit, because the more this country prospers, the more we can sell into that country and whatnot. The bigger problems have to do with commerce without regulation for environment, without other kinds of human capital being considered. And this is the biggest problem with the multinational corporations. And again, of course, you're seeing all this wealth concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. If that problem gets solved, that's the biggest problem, is the wealth getting concentrated, and that can be legislated without destroying everything, is my point. That can be legislated by laws that doesn't have to destroy agreements that have a certain benefit. There's a certain benefit to these agreements, and I'll tell you one of the benefits, one of the reasons why the EU came together initially after World War II, is because they didn't want another world war in Europe. And whether anybody buys it or not, Europe had two major wars in the 20th century. The 20th century started with World War I, in the middle of it was World War II, and they've never been at war since. A lot of this is because of a shared economic prosperity. This was one of the main reasons why the EU came together initially. And you saw France and Germany and the Netherlands come together around energy agreements and agreeing to share rather than fight with each other. This is the other thing that makes, for instance, if the US and China are trading partners, and beyond the rhetoric of China's ripping us off, it's much more complex than that. But if we have something mutual at stake, we'll be less likely to go to war with each other. This idea has power. And this is how these trade agreements and this internationalism, this is why it's of benefit in a general sense. Of course, there are huge abuses in the system. I'm talking about this because these are the subtleties and the complexities of this Jupiter Rahu in Leo. And there aren't easy answers. We can grasp for easy answers and say, like the Brits, we're leaving the EU. and you see their currency is tanking, and you're seeing a lot of things that it's quite likely going to diminish the power of Britain when all is said and done to some extent. There might be some benefit, maybe. It's hard to say at this point. One of the biggest things that's coming out now is that those who compelled the Brits to leave are now coming clean with the idea of, you know what, we really exaggerated a whole lot here. It's really not going to, we really can't say that all these things we promised are going to actually happen. They kind of sold them a line. And we're getting the same kind of potential line here in the US with Trump, who tries to make everything so simple. Oh, just vote for me and I'm the only one who'll make it all go away. Okay, and even though he hasn't thought through anything, nothing specific, no real clear policies. The main clear ones are build a wall or do this or that. So anyway, it's like, got to be careful. We got to be careful. A protest vote is not a plan. And so, again, these are the things that Jupiter Rahu is showing, where we need to really look at what we're doing right now. And this Brexit vote is a wake-up call for everyone to look and really ponder these things very closely. Ponder these things very closely. And ponder them deeply before we start just dismantling everything because of this desire for some kind of nationalism or to put the genie of globalization back in the bottle. That's not the solution. Instead, the solution is going to be to work through and methodically revolt, I should say, in a way that addresses the real issue, which is the abuse of power. The abuse of power is the issue, and that's also shown by Leo and Rahu in Leo, Rahu, Jupiter in Leo. But now, instead of the abuse of power being with one country, it's with what's really running the countries, which are the international corporations. Those are the ones that need. This is what needs to be changed, not the governments. Again, the governments are enthralled to the corporations, but we need to be very careful with politicians who propose simplistic solutions, like building a wall or doing this or that is going to change the reality of globalization, starting a trade war with China or Mexico and slapping tariffs on them. You can't do this anymore. This will hurt everyone. And this protectionism isn't going to benefit. So, big stuff going on right now with this change of Jupiter moving past Rahu. We've seen this go back and forth now. It's a huge watershed event that happened. We're going to see how this plays out. I have a feeling it's going to not be as sold. And the buyer needs to beware as we move forward with other referendums in Europe, with the United States and their voting, with our upcoming election. I'll be talking more about that soon, but for sure we see this transit of Jupiter through Leo, and especially now just passing Rahu, and the confusion that has come as a result of this Brexit vote. So many in England now we see saying, well, we didn't really think it was going to happen. We didn't really know what the implications were. We just want to throw the bombs out. You saw, even right after the EU, right after that vote, the most Googled search term in England was, what is the EU? What does it mean if England leaves the EU? People didn't even know. So anyway, very powerful stuff happening right now. And a time for us to really be thoughtful and careful and not just, break out the pitchforks and throw the bombs out without thinking through what we're doing or thinking through the benefits of what is possible. Because what's possible is in an interconnected world, we all have a stake together in the future. Whereas before things were so interconnected, there was just, sort of dominion over, dominant figures, figures dominating other cultures, dominating other countries. And as things start to as we start to have a mutual stake, there's a real possibility as we work through this time that we can arrive at a place on the other side where the excesses of international oligarchies have been more curtailed. And by the way, that's going to happen naturally. It's going to happen naturally without these government spasms. That's my feeling. Because naturally you're going to, once you see the rise of the middle class like in India, as it continues to increase, it's going to start to bring down the dominance of the West a little bit, and you're going to see a need for democratic solutions around the world, especially as we tackle things like global warming and climate change, and the technologies of the future need to be shared. I'm hopeful that it gets worked out, but it will be set back greatly as long as we continue these short-sighted practices, or as long as we think we can turn back to like a time when things were better. You know, we all have a feeling of wanting to do that back before we had to deal with, you know, the possibility of terrorists coming one of the ways we need to address that is to not demonize the very cultures where it comes from, but to support the non-radicalized, which are most of the Muslim world, and help and assist them in elevating the dialogue within their own culture, rather than keeping them all out and this bombing them to death. Of course we need to kill the radical elements that are more harmful to Islam than it is to the West. But again, this whole kind of framing, even around radical Islam, doesn't address the fact that ISIL, for example, is more damaging in the Muslim world than in the West. The Muslim world wants nothing more than to get rid of them. Much more so than we do in the West. So what do the radical elements in the West do? They say we're going to carpet bomb them and kill them, and again, and we demonize the whole religion, which is a conversion tactic. And again, these are simplest. These are my personal opinions. So if you want to tune out, that's fine. But these are the same ideologies that we're working through with this Jupiter Rahu in Leo, and we're seeing that I think this was a real watershed event that is coming to polarize the issue a lot, and to really show us the truth and say, okay, be careful what you wish for. Be careful about your fanatical, radical solution, and make sure you're not putting your faith in something worse than what you already have. And I will say, I think, certainly in the United States, we couldn't do a much worse solution than to elect Trump. That would be a huge mistake. And yes, that's what I think. And he has no answers. They're simplistic, and they're not thought through. And we need thoughtful leadership, for sure. And the new paradigm will work itself out. So, Jupiter Rahu in Leo, big shifts. And of course, on a personal level, we're also feeling it. Our own personal beliefs. And we're having to come to them because of the world that we're living in as well, around these social causes, these, either liberal or conservative viewpoints. All of this is coming to the forefront right now, whatever your views are.